Hey guys, it's Ann Yorks from the Flower Box. Grab your lattes and your puffer vests because today I'm taking you to the pumpkin patch. This is an annual tradition for my family. We love hiking the hills just to find the perfect pumpkin. So that is the inspiration for today's cookie set. I'm going to teach you how to make 6 cookies. We're going to take a look at the truck with pumpkin. I'll show you how to make a sunflower with chocolate sprinkles. We're going to stencil a cookie with Hello Fall. And then we're also going to make a pumpkin stack, a tall pumpkin, and a corncob. That's a lot, so let's cookie it up. Let's start with my favorite cookie from the set, the truck with pumpkin. Now, anytime I'm decorating a cookie with wheels, I love a little guideline just to get those circles just right. So I trace my coupler using a yellow food safe marker just to set off those icing areas. I have 20-second icing in my black icing bag, and I'm just gonna outline and flood the wheels all with one icing bag. The 20-second icing is great for small icing areas. And while that black is still wet, I'm going to add a white center to the wheel. That just breaks up all of that black and makes it look more like a wheel. Again, I just have flood icing in that white icing bag. Now I'm ready to add on the bumpers. And we're making these small gray icing areas. Again, I just have that 20-second icing, but I do have a tip on this bag just to give myself a little bit of extra control as I create the bumpers, just because I'm wiggling around the wheels a little bit more, and that tip gives me more control. If you need to tap the icing into place, go ahead and use your scribe just to get that icing exactly where you want it to be. And then once you have the wheels and the bumpers on, it's time to outline the truck. I'm using tulip red, and I have a tip number 2 on my piping bag. Now let's outline the pumpkin. Again, I have orange icing in my bag with tip number 2. Once I have all the areas of the truck outlined, I'm ready to start flooding. I'll start with the sides of the pumpkin and the window. Those are in the background, and we'll let those dry a little bit before we flood the icing areas that are on the foreground. So after that icing dries for about 30 minutes, we'll flood in the center of the pumpkin, and we'll also flood in the entire body of the truck. Now I love tulip red for any fall cookie sets because it almost has orange undertones to it, and it makes it the perfect red color for a muted fall color palette. You can get all of the details on the colors used in today's tutorial on the pumpkin patch blog post on flowerbox.com. Because that truck is such a large icing area, I'll let that dry for about an hour in front of a fan before I add the details. Then I pipe a small stem on the pumpkin, add some vines, all using tip number 2, and now I have a mini leaf tip number 349, to add that cute mini leaf onto the pumpkin. I'll add some details to the truck just to break up the red. I'm using tip number 2, and I'm just sectioning off a couple of icing areas just to make the truck look a little bit more dimensional. Don't forget the headlight. I'm using golden yellow. Now we're gonna add my favorite detail on this cookie. Using tip number 2 with my orange piping icing, I'm just going to pipe 3 dots close together to make itty bitty little pumpkins on the wheels. That just adds such a fun detail to this really cute cookie. Don't forget the leaves. Here's another way to decorate this truck with pumpkin, and this just has lots of pumpkin patch flair. First, I'm gonna make sure I size down the tip on my black icing bag to a tip number 1, and I'll add a black string of icing across the truck. Then I wanna add a pennant flag using all the fall colors. I have tip number 349 on all of the icing bags, and I'll just pipe out those little flags going across the truck in order. This is such a fun cookie. Surely this is the highlight on the platter. Don't forget to add the itty bitty pumpkins. A few more details and this one's done. Now let's take a look at the sunflower. Again, I always love to have a little help when piping a circle, so I'm just going to trace the lid from a bottle and use my yellow food marker. If you don't have a small circle in your kitchen, you can always cut one out of paper and that'll work just fine. I've flood in that brown center, and now we're ready to add some sprinkles. I place the cookie on a coffee filter that will catch the overflow, and then I generously sprinkle on those brown chocolate jimmies. If they get a little squirrely, go ahead and just use your scribe to tap them back into place. Any leftover sprinkles in the coffee filter can be funneled back into the sprinkle jar. Once all those sprinkles are in place, it's time to add the petals of the sunflower. I have a tip number 67 on my golden yellow icing bag, and I made sure that the icing is a stiff icing so that it holds the shape of the petals and doesn't get too blobby or lose all those little wiggly details. And as I pipe each petal, I have a strong squeeze, and then notice I give it a little bit of a wiggle from side to side, and I ease off my hand pressure as I pull the little petal out to have a thin tip. I like to add 2 rows of petals, just offsetting them to fill out this cookie and make it look super delicious. Let's use that same cookie shape, the sunflower, and make our stenciled Hello Fall cookie. I have yellow airbrush color in my airbrush gun, and I have the mini buffalo plaid stencil. This is an awesome stencil that you can use for so many fall, winter, holiday reasons. I'm just gonna add a light application to the surface of the icing, and now I'm ready to stencil on the Hello Fall message. My brown icing is a nice thick consistency. I'll center the stencil on the cookie, and then as soon as I have it in place, I'll use my thumb as my anchor finger. Now I'm ready to just glide that icing across the surface of the stencil. I'm pretty generous, and then I like to do a few more scrapes to remove the excess before I peel back that stencil. It's almost like peeling back a sticker to reveal that awesome message. I love layering stencils. It looks impressive, but it's really easy to do. Now, if you're enjoying all of these extra fun cookie supplies like the tips, the sprinkles, and the stencils, you can find those as well as the cutters in our new Pumpkin Patch Cookie Decorating Kit on flowerbox.com. Check it out on the kit page with all of the details on how to make these icing colors and extra details on the baking yield. Now let's get to the pumpkins. First, I'll show you how to make this really cool stack of pumpkins. I love this cookie because it features a wet on wet design that makes this pretty easy to complete. It makes it the perfect accent cookie to go with our truck with pumpkin, which takes a few more steps to create. So I always like to mix in a few cookies that are a little bit easier to pull together. So outline each of those 3 pumpkin areas, and then we're going to flood in the top and the bottom pumpkin using our sunset orange flood icing. Now for the wet on wet. I've mixed up a little bit of pastel orange, and I'm going to pipe some pumpkin lines on the surface of that wet orange icing. and it's just fun to see those lines melt into the background to create a nice flat surface that we can pipe on later. Let those icing areas dry for about 60 minutes in front of a fan. When you let icing areas dry, it creates that really cool dimension between the three pumpkins. That way you don't have to add any extra pumpkin lines, but it really gives the illusion that these pumpkins stacked on top of each other. I'll flood in the middle pumpkin, add those pastel orange highlights, and this pumpkin is ready for a quick dry, just 30 minutes in front of the fan before we add some stems, vines, and leaves. I'm using tip number 2 for the stem and the vines. There's no wrong way to do this. Just loop and swoop across the pumpkin to add those swirly little details. I have the mini leaf tip number 349, back on my green icing bag, and I'm going to add a few leaves just to add a little extra texture and dimension to these stacked pumpkins. And then this one's ready to go. That was fun and easy. I love that there are so many different pumpkin cookie cutters. So as part of this pumpkin patch set, I've selected the tall pumpkin to go in with this collection. I'm going to make it look really bumpy, so I want to outline each individual section of this pumpkin so that we can flood in alternating areas, and that will give this pumpkin lots of bump and texture. As you can see, my orange bag, it's running really low, but that's one of the awesome things about using tipless bags is once you get to the very end, it really is almost good to the last drop. I hope I have enough to make it through the set. Oh, just made it. That's awesome. All right, so now let's let this pumpkin dry in front of the fan, usually between 30 to 60 minutes, and those icing areas are really well set so that I can go in and flood the alternating areas with that pastel orange color. That just really gives something a little bit more interesting to the solid color pumpkin. And again, we're gonna add a stem, a few vines, just the loops and curls, and we also wanna use that tip number 349 to add the leaf. Okay, now our last cookie is also one of my favorites. I know this cookie cutter looks like a tulip, but surprise, we're gonna turn it into a corn cob. So let's pipe the green icing first. Those will be the leaves on the sides of our corn cob. That's really the husk. And then we're going to pipe the golden yellow corn cob background. Now, because that corn cob is inside those green leaves, let's go ahead and flood that first. That's also going to be where we add the first details, so it's nice to get that drying. I'll let that golden yellow dry for about 60 minutes in front of the fan before I come back and flood in the green leaves. And if you see any air bubbles, just get your scribe in there and pop away. I'll let that dry just real quick, let that icing set up before I add the second side of the corn husk. That just really brings the most dimension to our cookie design. Now it's time to add the corn. I have my yellow, orange, brown, and red icing bag, and I'm just gonna add dots of flood as I move down this cookie. Try to keep those dots spread out and leave a little wiggle room to work in some of the other icing colors. Let those dots dry just for 10 or 15 minutes in front of the fan. Get that icing set up so that it has its shape, and then you can go back in and add the other colored dots That just really helps to keep those little pieces of corn looking individual. Let me show you an example where I didn't wait for those pieces to dry. It was a little bit less successful because the corn pieces all sort of blended into each other. So definitely allow just a little bit of dry time on those golden pieces so that the corn looks individual. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed your trip to the pumpkin patch. Those were so much fun to make. Again, if you want to recreate those, you can find the pumpkin patch kit on flowerbox.com. I would love to see what you make. So if you make any of these cookies, I would be super flattered. Definitely tag at the Flowerbox shop on any social media channels so that I can see your cookie pictures. All right, guys, that's it for today. Until next time, happy decorating.